Hey everyone! In this video, I wanted to show you how I use Firefox developer tools to inspect the HTML and CSS when I'm building websites. Now, if you don't use DevTools, I highly recommend getting familiar with them because they make troubleshooting and debugging your CSS just a lot easier and faster. And if you do already use them, then you might learn a few new features that you can add to your workflow. This is going to be about Firefox developer tools, but whatever browser you use is going to have pretty much the same features. I will say that at least right now, Firefox has some really cool grid and Flexbox inspection tools that I haven't seen in other browsers, at least not yet. Well, I hope you find this video helpful, so let's get into it. All right, so this video that you see here is actually the website that you're going to learn how to build in my upcoming course, Responsive Design for Beginners. It's pretty incomplete. We're still just kind of beginning here. But if you're interested in finding out more about the course, I have a link down in the description that you can check out. So to get started, to turn on developer tools, you can do a few different things. So you can right-click anywhere on the website and then select the Inspect option. And then the developer tools panel will pop up next to the website. You can also use some hotkeys. There's Control-Shift-I to toggle. You can also use the F12 key, and it does the same thing. So let's take a look at the developer tool panel itself. So up at the top, you have a few tabs. It starts with the inspector, and that is what I'm going to be mainly focusing on in this video. But there's other tabs that have other tools that you can also use. And there's a couple things in some of the other tabs that I will be showing you a little bit later on. So next to the tabs, we have a little icon that looks like a phone and a tablet device. And if you click that, it'll turn on responsive design mode, and you can use that to emulate different devices. I will be going into this a little bit more later on as well. Next to that, we have the three dots. So if you open this, it lets you have different settings. So you can kind of control the layout of where the DevTools shows up in your window. You can even open them in a separate window if you want. And then there's an X to close out of the tools. So when we're in the developer tools in the inspector tab, the top panel that I have here, it shows you the actual HTML code in the website that's getting loaded. They also call this markup view according to the docs. And if you look here, some of the tags are using colors, this blue, magenta, and purple. And most of the elements are like that. And you can kind of click these arrows to expand so you can see all the child elements. So for example, here's the header. And if you hover over an element, it's going to highlight it where it is in the website. So I'm just going to expand. You can just kind of keep going down the tree to see all the different elements that are in the website. Now, most of the tags are with these different colors. However, there are other tags, and they are kind of in this sort of gray color. And what that means is that these tags are not for elements that are visually on the page. So they might be hidden with different things like display none, or they might just be tags that don't show anything, like these script tags. And also the head tag is not, it's in gray as well. Now, if we look down in the tree and look at the different elements, you might see that there's some little badges here, and they kind of tell you information about the element. So this one, overflow, the overflow badge indicates that the element is, off the page. And this can be helpful to identify if you have horizontal scrolling in your website, which you don't want. It can help identify what elements might be causing that. In addition, you can see here that there's this grid label or grid badge, and that is applied to elements that are grid parents or grid container elements. And they have the same thing for Flexbox. Like if we inspect down here, we can see this features wrapper div has the flex wrapper, has the flex badge. And another badge that you might see is the white space badge. And this is if you have these like really tiny spaces between elements on the website and you don't know where it's coming from, that tiny little space might be coming from white space, which happens when you are using a new line in your HTML markup. And this is actually pretty cool that Firefox actually tells you that the space exists, and it also tells you can see on the website that it's telling you the size of the space. I don't know if you can read that, but this one is 3.2 pixels wide. So that can be super helpful if there's some random space and you don't know where it came from. So in the markup view panel, another thing you can do that's kind of cool is you can search through the HTML markup for different elements or even just like text values. So for example, I'm going to search for the word unicorn. So I'm going to search for that and press enter. And it tells you that there's one of two results. So there's two results that have the word unicorn in them. And the first one is this image tag. And if I press enter, it'll go to the next one. And there's the word unicorn in this H1 text. You can also use this search to look for actual elements. And you can type in the CSS selector. So for example, if I type in div and then dot for the class, and then it's going to auto-populate all the different divs and their classes. So you can just select one. And then if I press enter, it tells me that there's 3 results of div with a class of wrapper in the website. So this is pretty handy, especially if you're trying to see how many elements exist on a page with a certain selector. So next to the search box, there's this plus icon. And if you click it, Firefox is going to create a new node that's a child of whatever element or node you have selected in the markup. So if I click the plus here, you can see that it added a blank div. Another cool thing you can do is if you right-click any element on the page in the markup, you can select Edit as HTML, and then you can literally just write whatever markup you want. So here is some test markup text. And then to kind of make the changes go through, you just have to click off there. And then now you can see that we just added some text here. And it's kind of cool. You can like click and drag to move it around. So let's say I want to move it over here. Then you can see that it moved down there. So stuff like that, you can kind of edit the markup, and this can be pretty helpful. And then you can also delete elements on the page as well. So if I click on this element and press the delete key, then it goes away. Another way you can use the delete function is if you click on the tag itself and press delete, it'll delete the actual tag, the entire tag. However, if you want to get rid of a class, you can click on the class in the markup panel and then press delete, and then it's just going to delete the class, but the actual tag will be in there. And unfortunately, they don't really indicate to you when you clicked on the class and know that it'll delete just the class. So if you're deleting elements and you're finding that you have to press delete twice to get rid of the element, then that might be why, because the first time you hit delete, it only deleted the class name. Another thing you can do is if you're right-clicking and inspecting an element, and in the markup, you can right-click and you can actually duplicate the element. So right-click, and if you click on duplicate node, it's going to duplicate the node. So that can be helpful too, especially if you're, working with like a group of items. So let's say this features item, we have 3 of them. If I want to make some more, I can right-click one of them and click duplicate node. And then now it's just created a bunch more. So this can be pretty helpful too when you're just figuring out layout stuff to see what the container will look like if you have, more and more children items. Okay, and then next to the plus icon is this eyedropper icon, which is basically a color picker. So you can just click on that, and then if you hover over any part of the website, it'll tell you what color in hex code the element is. So this can be pretty helpful. And then if you click, it's going to copy the hex code, and then you can just like paste it in your styles or wherever you need. Okay, so let's look at some of the CSS styles. So I'm just going to move this panel up a little bit, and I'm going to inspect the H1 tag here. So under the markup panel is this breadcrumbs bar, and this one sort of shows you all the ancestor elements of the current element that's selected up in the markup. And it's kind of cool because you can click and it'll navigate to the parent or ancestor element that you've selected. And you can click the left and right arrows to, if it's too long, you can go all the way up to the HTML tag and navigate that way. So going back to the H1 tag, under the breadcrumbs bar is a bunch of different tabs that tells you information about that element. One of the main ones that I use is this rules tab, and this will tell you all the different style rules that are currently being applied to this element. And the styles are listed in descending order, starting with the most specific style selector and then going down into less specific. So this is why the top one is for inline styles, because those are going to be the most specific styles that you can add to an element. So let's say we can say color orange. And you can see that this rule has been added to the element, and up in the markup, it's added an inline style to make the color orange. And one helpful thing that Firefox does is, let's say you have like a typo in your styles or there's something kind of invalid with it. So let's say I just typed the color wrong and now it's not getting affected, or this style is not working. You can see that because it's crossed out, and then there's this little warning icon that says invalid property name. So, you know, it does the same thing here, invalid property value. So this is just helpful so that you know, if the style is not being applied, this will tell you pretty quickly why it's not being applied. Also, another thing you can do is if you want to uncheck the box, it'll stop applying that style rule. And you can use this for any of the style rules. If you just hover, you can see the checkbox appears. So this is a really easy way to see any differences in styles or see how it looks if the style is not being applied. And another thing that Firefox will tell you is if there's a specific reason for a property not being applied, that's not like because of a typo or something. So I'm going to say top 10 pixels, and this shows up in gray. And if you hover over this little info icon, it says this top has no effect because it's not a positioned element. Try setting its position property to something other than static. So this is very helpful. So let's say position relative. So now you can see that when we turn on position relative, so that the H1 tag isn't just position static, which is the default positioning, then the top rule of 10% or of 10 pixels does take effect. So that's pretty helpful. Okay, and also in the rules tab under the bar with the different tabs, we have a filter text box. So this is helpful if you want to, identify what a specific property is, and you have like a bunch, you can just quickly filter through them. So for example, if I type in margin, then it's going to only show the styles that use margin. And then next to the filter styles text box is this HOV. This is a pseudo class inspector. So if you click on that, it's now going to show you all the different options for pseudo classes that you can kind of force the state on that element. So for example, if I want to force the hover state on this element, I just check that box. And then if I want to add a style for the hover state for testing, I can click on the plus icon to add a new style rule, and it's automatically made the selector have the hover pseudo class. So now I can say maybe magenta. And if the box is checked, then the hover state is forced. So if I uncheck it, it turns it off. But because the style is still there, it's just not being shown. If I hover over the element on the actual website, then it shows you the hover state. So next to the pseudo class toggle is the class toggle. And I don't use this that often, but if you click this, you can add a new class name, which might be helpful. So you can just say test. You can see immediately up in the markup, it's added a test. So one thing you could do is, for example, for these paragraphs down here, I'm going to try adding a new class. And I have another helper class already loaded, and I'm going to say large. So now if you add the class, it's going to add the class name to the class list of the element, and it's taking effect because I had some paragraph large styles. So this is kind of an easy way to add a class. You can also do it by just double clicking up in the markup if you want to do that. So there's just multiple ways of doing different things. And the plus icon, so let's say you just have the element by itself selected up in the markup and you want to add some styles to it based on the class selector. If you click plus, then it'll automatically add a new selector based on the class. Or if the element has an ID, like I have this main tag with an ID of main. If I click the plus icon, it's going to add a selector based on the ID. So next to the plus icon is some other icons that can emulate different, themes or modes for the website. So for example, I don't have any styles for light mode and dark mode here, but if you click the sun icon, it'll select light mode for this website. You can also select dark mode. And this last one's for print media simulation, just in case you have like a print style for your website for print view. And then let's inspect that headline again. And if you look in the different selectors and the style rules, one thing that I found helpful is in the right, it tells you exactly where the style came from. And if you're using Sass and Sass Maps, it'll actually tell you the original Sass file where this style came from, as well as the line number. So this one says typography.scss, which is a file. :10 means it's from line 10 in this file. And this is super helpful for debugging your styles if you don't know exactly where it came from. And if you click on the link itself, then it's going to load in this other tab, Style Editor. So it'll actually tell you, it'll load the actual Sass file. And unfortunately, if you're using Sass, I think it's like you would think that you'd be able to make a change here and edit it, but for some reason it doesn't work. And I think it has something to do with like having to recompile the preprocessor and stuff like that. But I think if you're just loading your styles from a CSS file, I think you can make changes here, but I'm not positive. But I mainly just make the actual file changes in VS Code, so I don't really use that feature very often. It's mainly just to locate the file and the line number. All right, so next let's check out the Layout tab. So next to the Rules tab, if we click on Layout, then this is going to tell us different styles related to layout styles. There's Flexbox and Grid panels, and this is for if you're inspecting Flexbox or Grid parents or children. And then below that is the Box Model panel, which shows you the box model. So this is the blue box is the content, which is the actual, text or image content or whatever. Outside of that is the padding and then border and then margin. And the cool thing about this is that it'll tell you. So for example, the H1 tag has a bottom margin of 20. Because if you look in the rules tab for this H1 tag, we have this margin block end, which is the same as margin bottom, of 1.25 rems. And if you want to know what that calculates to in pixels, then if you go to Layout tab, it'll tell you that it's 20 pixels. And you can even edit the values here. So let's say I want to change this to 60. Then we can see that it's now changed to 60 or 10 and so on. So this is pretty helpful. You can add a border. So things like that. And then below this little diagram, it tells you more information. So this one is the dimensions of the element. So it's 536 by 140 pixels. And then under that is the different box model properties that are affecting the layout display of this element. So let's take a look at the other layout panels here. So let's look at the grid panel first. So in the markup, one thing that's kind of cool, which we mentioned earlier, is the grid label that is displayed in the markup view for grid containers. So if you actually click this badge, it's going to turn on highlighting on the actual website. And then if you go to the Layout tab and expand the grid panel, then this one is actually going to, let's move this up a little bit. This is going to list all the grid parents or grid containers on the website. So we can see here there's 3. And if you hover over them, it will highlight in the website. So we have the top nav wrapper, then we have top nav links, and then we have the hero wrapper. And if we just have one selected, then below the list of the grid parents is a little diagram of the grid that's selected. If you hover over each cell, it'll tell you on the website, what the position is of the cell and also the size. So this can be pretty helpful. But if you have more than one selected, then the diagram goes away. So you need to only have one selected in order for that to show up. And some other options that you can do with the overlay grid are in the grid display settings, you can display line numbers, so you can toggle that off. And then display area names. I'm not using area names right now, but if you did, then there would be a little label that's kind of added over each cell. And you can extend the lines infinitely if you want. So a couple more things I wanted to show you here for the grid inspector is if you click on the little box here, then in the markup view, it's going to navigate to the element that is, whatever this grid parent is. So top nav links. If I click up at this top one, top nav wrapper, then it's going to actually go up there. So it's kind of a quick way to get around to quickly look at the different grid parents. And you can control the color of the lines. So if you click on that little circle, you can choose different colors if you want. I will say that this is actually pretty buggy. It's one of my annoyances with using this inspector tool because You can change the color, but if I reload the page while the highlighting's on, then it's going to default to this like purple color that you can't really see. And you can make the custom color come back if you toggle the checkbox, or you can just like choose a different color. But it is one kind of big bug in the grid tools that's not too great. Okay, so let's check out the Flexbox Inspector tools. So again, if you go up in the markup and you expand elements, it'll tell you with this little badge which elements are Flexbox parents. So kind of in a similar way to the grid inspector, if you click on the badge, it's going to turn on highlighting. And then in the layout tab, you can see here it says Flex Container. This is the features wrapper div, which is the Flex parent. And again, you can choose a color. I'll try maybe orange. And then you can do this toggle to turn it on and off. And then under the Flex Container info, it says Flex Items. So this tells you all the Flex child items of the Flex parent. And if I hover over each of them, then they'll get highlighted on the website. And if you click on one, it's going to select that item up in the markup view. And then it's also going to automatically load in the layout tab the Flexbox styles. And this is really helpful. And one reason why I like using Firefox, because you can turn on and off the highlighting, and it actually tells you how the browser calculated the size of the Flex child based on the different Flex properties. So for example, this one, if you look in the rules, we set each of the features items to be Flex 1. So that means Flex Grow is 1, Flex Shrink is 1, and Flex Spaces is 0. So if you go in the layout tab, it tells you that information kind of in a different way. So content size, whatever's up here is kind of what the Flex Spaces value is. And for us, the Flex Spaces is 0. So it says 0. And then it tells you if it grew or shrunk. And this one, it says flexibility item was set to grow. And then it actually tells you the pixel size that the element grew by, 324.2. And it tells you the final size, which is pretty cool. And there is a bug, unfortunately, with the Flexbox Inspector as well. So if I have selected the Flexbox parent up here in the markup view, and if you reload, it kind of, sometimes it gets stuck somehow. So it's like the highlighting disappear, but it's like now only over this one element. And you can try to get rid of it by sort of toggling the Flex badge again, or here. Also, if you click off of the element to a different part of the page. So for example, I've clicked the hero section tag. If I hit reload once, it looks okay. If I hit it twice, now the highlighting has moved up into the hero section, which is like very strange. And you like literally cannot get rid of it if you keep reloading until you can either toggle the original Flexbox parent badge to toggle the highlighting on and off, and then it'll go away. I think another thing you can do is if this weird bug happens, then if you go back to the Flex parent, the features wrapper div, and you select it in the markup and then reload a couple more times, then it like goes back to normal. But yeah, this bug's really weird. And if all else fails and it just like gets really stuck, you can always just like close and reopen the tab to make it sort of start from scratch. But just wanted to mention that because it's come up a lot when I've used the Flexbox inspection tools, and it is kind of annoying. But, I think the pros outweigh the cons for this because, I really enjoy the other Flexbox inspection tools. All right, so next to the layout tab is the computed tab. So let's go over there and take a look at that. And I'm going to inspect the H1 tag again with that. Actually, let's turn off the Flexbox highlighting so we don't get that weird bug again. Okay, so we got the H1 tag selected here. So in the computed tab, this one tells you the sort of actual, computed or calculated styles that are being applied to this element. So for example, if you look at font size, it says 69.8367 pixels. And if you expand this arrow, it tells you, what style rule that came from. And this one came from this H1 tag style using clamp to calculate the font size. So computed is kind of nice because it tells you like the, calculated final font size, which can be helpful if you're trying to, compare what you have on the website to the original design. And kind of like the rules tab, there's a filter text box. So let's say font. So then if I type in font, it's only going to show the style rules that have the font word in the style. And next to the filter text box is this checkbox that says browser styles. So if you turn this on, it'll then display all the styles being applied to the element, also from the default browser styles, which is a ton, which is one way that the filter text box can be really handy. Because if you don't have this, and it's literally going to just show you every single default property that is being applied to the element from the default style rules. But it's going to be really helpful if you're trying to figure out, where a style came from. So one thing to note is that when you're loading the default browser styles, all the styles that are coming from your actual style sheets have this right arrow caret thing, and it tells you where it came from. You can tell something's a default style because there's no arrow next to it. So all these different properties are coming from the browser, except for font size and font family. Okay, so that's good for the computed styles. The next tab is the changes tab. And this one I actually hadn't really used a ton, but I think I will now in the future, because what this does is if you start editing your styles, so let's say, I add a new selector for hero title and I say font size, something different like 10 rems. Then if you go to the changes tab, this change that you made is actually going to show up here, and you can copy individual rules or you can copy all of the rules that you've added. So let's try adding color aqua. So then if we click on the changes tab, then it's also added the aqua color to the element. So this is actually really helpful because if you're using the DevTools a lot and like kind of tweaking and adjusting your styles right in the browser, it's a good way to keep track of all the things that you have to put back into your code files before you reload the website and potentially lose everything that you've written here. Because if you're adding these styles just in the browser and you reload, they're all going to go away. So let me show you that. So there you go. So we reloaded, all the styles we added have gone away, and there's nothing here in the changes tab. So I think it would be a really helpful thing to use just to make sure that you've copied and pasted all the styles that you need to from the browser back to your VS Code. So next is the changes tab. I don't really use a compatibility tab, so I can't really speak much to that. Next to that is the fonts tab, and this is kind of cool because it tells you the different fonts that are being used on the website. So we have this text selected, and it tells us that it's using Source Sans Pro as a font family, and actually has a size, line height, spacing, weight, italic options shown. And below that, it says all fonts on page. So if you expand that, then it's going to show you all the fonts being used, which is pretty cool. The size thing I think it might be getting thrown off because I'm using clamp to set the font size. Let me just try unchecking that. Let's try that. There we go. So now it's set to a static 2.625 rems. So let's go back to the fonts tab. So now it is auto-populated. I think just using clamp, threw off the tool, so it can't really inspect it very well. This is kind of cool because you can use a slider to like change it right in front of you. You can also manually type in something. So it's pretty helpful. Letter spacing and then font weight. And this will depend on what fonts you've loaded. So right now I've loaded from Google Fonts only the regular and the bold weights. So that's why it doesn't look like it's changing. So just keep that in mind if you're adjusting the weight and you're wondering why it's not changing. It might be because you haven't downloaded the font file that you need to for that weight. That's about it for the different inspection tools. This animations tab, this is actually pretty helpful if you have keyframe animations loaded on your website. I don't have any here, which is why there's nothing loading here, but if you do, then you can use this to get information about what elements are getting animated and where it's coming from. And you can like replay the animation, which would be really helpful when you're trying to debug stuff. All right, so going back here to the rules tab, one a couple other things that I wanted to show you just in this top bar here is that if you want to look at all the different tabs, like let's say there's not enough room to show all of them, if you have a horizontal scroll wheel, then you can scroll through them. But if it doesn't work for whatever reason, you can click on this down arrow and then you can just kind of select whatever tab you want. And the other one that you might want to use if you have enough like real estate space for the DevTools, if you click on this, it'll toggle the 3-panel inspector, which means that the top panel is going to be your markup view. The left panel here is the rules tab, all the styles there. And then on the right panel is going to be the other tab, whichever one you want to use. So I don't use this too often just because I don't usually have enough space and I want to give more space to the actual website. But it can be helpful if you have that and you want to see like 2 things at the same time. The next feature I wanted to show you is the responsive design mode, which is really helpful and I use this a lot. So up at the top bar next to the top tabs, there's this icon that I mentioned earlier, responsive design mode. It looks like a phone and a tablet icon. If you click that to turn on, then you're going to be able to emulate the viewport width and height of the actual device. And once that's on, you can select whatever device you want to emulate. So I have iPhone 11 selected, but they have a ton of other options. This is iPad. And one cool thing is that you can still kind of manually change the viewport width and height. So if you look in this bottom right corner, there's a little draggable thing. So you can change that. And this is really helpful when you're, testing your responsive styles. And you want to make sure things look good. Also in the devices, you can, there's actually more devices and are displayed in this dropdown. So if you want to look at more of them, if you click on the bottom to edit list, then you can sort of check and uncheck whatever device you want to show up in that menu when you're clicking them. And you can add a custom device. So in this one, you just like fill in the name, the viewport size, and then the device pixel ratio. That's for like Retina and other screens that have a higher density of pixels. And then user agent string, and then if you want it to be a touch screen or not, etc. And then you can save it with the custom name, which is pretty cool. So let's just go back to iPhone, and this might be a little hard to see because it's so small, but next to the name of the device, we have the actual, in numbers, the viewport width and then height. So this is 375 by 812. And then next to that, you can click to rotate to landscape or portrait mode. And then there's a DPR. This one, it's not editable for whatever reason, but it tells you that for the iPhone, it has a device pixel ratio of 3. And then next to that is a throttling thing, so you can emulate what it would look like on different speeds of data, which is pretty helpful. And then next to that is a touch simulation. So you can use that if you turn it on to, simulate the touch actions. And then on the far right is you can take a screenshot of the viewport. So if you click that, it'll literally just take a screenshot of, whatever is there. And there's settings here, which you can use to, like I have the left align turned on, but by default, I think everything's centered. So you can do that. You can hide or show the user agent, and then reload based on different conditions. And then to get out of the responsive design mode, you can click on the X here, or you can click on the icon again. So those are the main tools I use for CSS stuff in the inspector tab. I did also want to show you a couple other features that I use that are in different tabs. And these can be pretty helpful. They're not related specifically to CSS. Next up, let's check out the network tab. So I'm going to click that double right angle bracket, go to network. And this one's pretty helpful. And when I use this, I usually dock to bottom just so I can see everything. And this basically will show you all the files that are downloaded when the website's loaded. So if I have this open and I hit reload, you can see things are getting reloaded. And this is helpful if your website is pretty slow to load and you're trying to identify if there's like some files, maybe images or other files that are just really big. You can load the network tab And then you can filter by different types of files, so HTML, CSS, etc., images. So if I want to only see images, then you can do that. And you can sort by like size descending. So this is what I do a lot when I'm trying to figure out if there's images that are too big. So this is kind of nice. It tells you the actual size. If you hover over this, it'll show you a preview of what the image looks like, which can be pretty helpful. Also, another important feature is the disable cache checkbox. So if you check this, this will disable the cache, meaning the temporary storage that your browser uses to keep, image and other files, so that when you reload a website or visit a website again, it doesn't have to re-download everything from the server. So that's good for if you're a user, but if you're a developer and you want to, test, say, the load speed, then you generally want to make sure that this disable cache is checked. And then again, this is like what we saw in responsive design mode, the throttling dropdown, so you can choose different data speeds and then, see how the website loads that way. And then also you can filter by URL. So let's say I'm going to reload everything. All. Let's say I wanted to see what files are coming from google.com. So if I type in Google, then it's going to show me that, this font family file is coming from fonts.googleapis.com. So that can be helpful if you use a lot of third-party tools and you want to see which ones are coming from where and, how big the file size is and stuff like that. Okay, so I think that's good for the network tab. The next one I wanted to show you is the accessibility tab. So let's go there. And let's go back to there. So in the accessibility tab, this will basically helps you identify and flag any accessibility issues. I will say that even though this does seem to check for a lot of things, you probably want to also run your website through like an actual accessibility checker tool, which you can find online. But these are good for just like quick things like you can check for different issues like contrast, keyboard stuff, text labels. So I'm going to check all issues. And this tells us that we have one element that does have an issue, and it has an issue with contrast. So this is telling us that we do have an element that has a contrast issue. So you can see the element in question is there and that has this contrast label, like a warning label. And then on the bottom under the checks panel, it tells us that the text contrast is only 2.00, which is too low. So I can also do this. Let's just kind of emulate the contrast issue. So I'm going to change the color of the H1 tag to blue, and then I'm going to go back to accessibility. Let's go back to all issues. So now we have, this obviously is like a low contrast, not enough contrast. So it's telling us that the contrast of the blue text on the sort of purple blue background the contrast is 1.5. And needs to be a higher number than that, which you can see if you click on this Learn More link. So this is telling you that the large text, which is what the H1 tag is, it needs to have a 3-to-1 ratio of contrast for the minimum rating. And then if you want to really go the extra mile and do the AAA rating, it needs to have a contrast of 4.5. So that's why this is telling us that it's not enough. So this can be helpful. Again, I would, make sure that you use other tools if you're doing accessibility checks on your website. You can also go to the accessibility inspector if you right-click an element and go to show accessibility properties, or on the website, right-click inspect accessibility properties. It goes to the same place. And you can see here at the top, it sort of tells you the hierarchy of all the different elements. So this is kind of helpful for you to see. So for example, for the image tag, it's showing you the alt text, unicorn with stars, and then it tells you the text content of text elements. And now we have this selected with the white on purple background. You can see the color and contrast is 5.69, which is, meets the AAA standards for accessible text, which is good. Aside from checking issues, you can also simulate different types of vision impairments. this way it would for someone who doesn't have visual impairments, but you can also select different types of color blindness. So no red, no green, no blue, etc. So this is, I think it's pretty helpful. I'm not sure how close this is to like, humans who have these issues, but I mean, I think it's good that they at least have this. So going back to none, the other thing you can do is click show tabbing order. So this is for keyboard users who are using the keyboard. And every time you hit tab, it'll go to a different link. So this is telling you the order that you'll get tabbed in. So it's definitely good to keep in mind and make sure that the order of things kind of matches the order when you tab through the website. Okay, so I think that's it for the accessibility tab. The last one I wanted to show you just kind of really quickly is the storage. And I don't use this super often, but it can be really helpful if you are testing cookie functionality for a website you're building. Like if you're setting a cookie or changing a cookie value, you're often going to want to delete the cookie. And if you don't want to completely clear your entire cache with, login information, etc., you can just delete the cookies themselves. I don't have any set right now on the website, but if you did, it will list all the cookies based on the domain, and then you can go in and like individually delete the cookies just for that domain. And I'm assuming it does the same for different types of storage. So this is helpful if you need to keep deleting cookies so you can test the functionality on your website. All right, so that's all the ways that I use Firefox developer tools when I'm building and debugging websites. Let me know down in the comments if any of these features are things that you learned for the first time, or if there's another feature in the dev tools that you really like that I didn't mention. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.